In 1812, portrait painter Samuel Whitmore captured the likeness of Lieutenant James Blackwood before his departure for the Canadian frontier during the opening months of the war with Great Britain. What the Blackwood family discovered over the following decades would challenge everything biology understood about human aging and leave experts questioning whether the passage of time itself could be transferred between living beings and their representations. This investigation began in June 1812, when Whitmore completed the commissioned portrait of 23-year-old Lieutenant Blackwood in his military uniform at the family estate in Baltimore, Maryland. According to records discovered only in 1959 in the basement archives of the Smithsonian Institution, this seemingly routine military portrait would reveal temporal phenomena so disturbing that federal authorities classified the findings at levels that remain restricted to this day. Lieutenant James Blackwood had enlisted in the Maryland militia following the American declaration of war against Britain on June 18, 1812. According to military records, he served with distinction in campaigns along the Niagara frontier and later in the defense of Baltimore during the British assault of September 1814. The portrait had been commissioned by his mother, Catherine Blackwood, as a keepsake should her son fail to return from the war. According to Samuel Whitmore's artistic journal, preserved in the Maryland Historical Society archives, the Blackwood Portrait Commission proceeded without incident during the sitting sessions in early June 1812. Whitmore's detailed account of the portrait's completion would later provide investigators with crucial evidence of what physicists would classify as the most significant temporal displacement phenomenon ever documented in American history. Whitmore's journal entry for June 8, 1812 reads, "Completed the Blackwood military portrait today. The young lieutenant sat with admirable patience through the extended sessions required for detailed work. The finished portrait captures him at the height of youthful vigor. Clear eyes, unlined face, the robust health of a young man entering his prime." Mrs. Blackwood expressed great satisfaction with the work, noting that she now possesses a perfect image of her son should the worst occur during his military service. What made the portrait significant was not its creation, but what the Blackwood family observed over subsequent years. According to family correspondence preserved in the Library of Congress, Catherine Blackwood began documenting unusual changes in the portrait's appearance within months of her son's departure for the frontier. Catherine's letter to her sister Eleanor, dated March 15, 1813, documents the first observation. "I write to you of a most peculiar circumstance regarding James's portrait. Upon examining it this morning, I observed that the painted face appears subtly different from when Whitmore delivered it. The features remain James's own, yet they seem somehow older. Slight lines have appeared at the corners of the eyes. The skin texture appears less youthful. I initially attributed this to tricks of light, but subsequent examination confirms the changes are real and measurable. But there was something about the portrait changes that Catherine found increasingly disturbing as months progressed." According to her confidential diary entries, discovered decades later, the portrait continues aging, while my son, when he returns on leave, appears unchanged. James visited in September 1813, looking exactly as he did when departing in June 1812. The same youthful face, unlined skin, vigorous health. Yet his portrait now shows a man of perhaps 30 years, with visible aging that James himself has not experienced. The phenomenon continued throughout the war years, with the portrait demonstrating progressive aging, while Lieutenant Blackwood, according to all observers, remained frozen at his 1812 appearance. Catherine's diary entries document systematic comparisons. December 1813, portrait appears as man of 32 years, while James on Christmas leave appears unchanged from June 1812. March 1814, portrait shows man of 35 years, grey beginning at temples. James visited looking exactly as painter captured him 2 years ago. September 1814, portrait now shows man of 40 years. James survived the British bombardment of Baltimore without visible injury or aging, appearing as youthful as the day he first donned his uniform. The investigation into the Blackwood portrait phenomenon began in 1959, when Dr. Margaret Foster of the Smithsonian Institution was conducting research into early American portraiture techniques. According to her case files, preserved in the Smithsonian archives. Dr. Foster's analysis of the Blackwood portrait revealed characteristics that challenged fundamental understanding of temporal biology and physical aging. Dr. Foster's initial examination of the portrait was part of her comprehensive study documenting War of 1812-era painting methods. According to her research notes, the Blackwood portrait initially appeared to be a well-executed but unremarkable military portrait typical of the period. However, examination of family documentation describing the portrait's progressive aging led to analysis that revealed temporal displacement characteristics, demanding immediate scientific investigation. What Dr. Foster discovered during her analysis defied everything biology understood about aging processes and temporal progression. According to her confidential report to the Smithsonian director, dated April 8, 1959, systematic examination of the Blackwood portrait reveals that the painted image has undergone genuine biological aging over 147 years, while comprehensive analysis of photographic documentation of Lieutenant Blackwood, spanning 1812 to 1867, demonstrates that he aged at approximately 1/10 normal human rate. Most disturbing is evidence suggesting that the portrait absorbed the temporal aging that should have affected the living subject. The breakthrough in Dr. Foster's analysis came when she obtained access to daguerreotype photographs of James Blackwood taken throughout his lifetime, spanning from 1843, when he was 54 years old, through 1867, age 78. According to her notes, photographic evidence reveals that James Blackwood at age 78 appeared physically consistent with a man of approximately 30 to 35 years. Systematic comparison with his 1812 portrait, which by 1867 displayed the appearance of a man in his 80s, demonstrates inverse aging relationship between subject and representation. Dr. Foster's detailed analysis revealed that the temporal displacement followed precise mathematical patterns. According to her technical report, measurement of aging progression in the portrait compared with documented aging of the living subject reveals that for every year of biological aging, the portrait underwent, James Blackwood, aged approximately 36 days. This suggests systematic temporal energy transfer from a living subject to painted representation, effectively preserving the subject's youth by displacing his aging process into the portrait. This was just the beginning of what would become the most disturbing investigation into temporal displacement in Smithsonian history. Dr. Foster's enhanced analysis revealed that the portrait demonstrated not merely visual aging, but actual biological deterioration. According to laboratory examination, the paint surface showed cellular decay patterns consistent with aging human tissue, rather than inorganic pigment deterioration. According to Dr. Foster's technical analysis, microscopic examination of the portrait's paint surface reveals structures resembling aged skin cells, with cellular breakdown patterns consistent with biological aging rather than chemical pigment degradation. Most disturbing is evidence that the painted surface maintains biochemical activity. The portrait appears to be aging as if it were living tissue rather than inorganic artistic material. The investigation took a more troubling turn when Dr. Foster attempted to trace the painting technique Samuel Whitmore had employed for the portrait. According to artist records discovered in Maryland archives, Whitmore had spent several months in 1811 studying with a reclusive European portrait master known only as Vandermeer, who allegedly possessed knowledge of Renaissance painting techniques incorporating alchemical principles. According to correspondence discovered in Whitmore's estate papers, Vandermeer had taught him methods for creating portraits that could establish temporal resonance with their subjects. A letter from Vandermeer to Whitmore, dated November 1811, describes, "The portrait technique I have taught you creates sympathetic connection between representation and subject through which temporal energy may flow. When properly executed, the portrait becomes temporal reservoir, capable of absorbing aging processes from living subject, effectively preserving subject's youth, while the representation undergoes biological aging in their stead." Even more disturbing was Dr. Foster's discovery that Vandermeer's technique required incorporation of biological materials from the portrait subject into the paint medium. According to Whitmore's confidential notes, per Vandermeer's instruction, I incorporated samples of Lieutenant Blackwood's blood, hair, and skin cells into the paint medium, creating biological connection between portrait and subject that enables temporal energy transfer. The subject must never learn of this incorporation, as conscious awareness apparently disrupts the temporal displacement effect. But Whitmore's notes revealed that the temporal displacement had unintended consequences. According to his documentation, Vandermeer warned that temporal displacement through portraiture is not without cost. While the subject gains extended youth, the portrait absorbs not merely years, but the accumulated experiences, traumas, and psychological weight of aging. The portrait becomes repository for all suffering the subject would have experienced through normal aging, concentrating decades of potential pain into the represented image. The investigation deepened when Dr. Bash Foster examined what happened to the portrait during James Blackwood's military service. According to family correspondence, the portrait demonstrated particularly dramatic aging during periods when James faced combat, suggesting that the temporal displacement absorbed not only chronological aging, but also trauma and injury that would have affected the living subject. Catherine Blackwood's diary entry from September 13th, 1814, documents: "Yesterday's British bombardment of Fort McHenry saw James in thick of fighting. This morning, his portrait shows dramatic changes, a fresh scar across the painted cheek, burns on the painted hands, an overall appearance of man who has endured terrible combat stress. Yet James returned from the fort unscathed, bearing no injuries, despite having been under fire for 25 hours. The portrait has somehow absorbed the wounds he should have suffered, but the diary entries revealed that the portrait absorbed more than physical injuries. According to Catherine's observations, I perceive in the painted eyes an expression of horror and trauma that was not present before the battle. The portrait's face now shows the psychological scarring of combat, the haunted look of men who have witnessed terrible things. Yet James maintains his youthful demeanour and untroubled spirit, as if the portrait has also absorbed the emotional and psychological toll of his experiences." The investigation took an even more alarming turn when Dr. Foster discovered that James Blackwood had lived to the extraordinary age of 103 years, dying in 1892 while still appearing physically to be in his early 40s. According to medical records and witness testimony, he maintained remarkable health and vigour throughout his extended life, demonstrating none of the physical or cognitive decline associated with advanced age. Dr. Foster's investigation revealed that the portrait, meanwhile, had undergone catastrophic deterioration, corresponding to more than 150 years of biological aging, compressed into James's actual 103-year lifespan. According to photographic documentation from the 1890s, the portrait by 1892 displayed the appearance of a man of approximately 180 years, grotesquely aged, skin decayed to near skeletal appearance, eyes sunken and clouded, overall presentation suggesting biological aging far exceeding normal human lifespan limits. But what Dr. Foster found most disturbing was evidence that the temporal displacement had affected not only James, but also his descendants. According to family medical records, all of James Blackwood's children and grandchildren demonstrated significantly extended lifespans and slowed aging, suggesting the temporal displacement effect had become hereditary. Dr. Foster's investigation into the Blackwood family's extended lifespans led her to examine medical records spanning 4 generations. According to documentation, James's 5 children all lived past age 90, while appearing physically decades younger than their chronological ages, and his grandchildren demonstrated similar age resistance patterns. According to genetic analysis conducted by Dr. Foster, the Blackwood descendants demonstrate cellular aging rates approximately 1/3 to 1/2 normal human progression. This suggests that temporal displacement initiated through James's portrait has created hereditary modification, affecting multiple generations. Most significant is evidence that the effect appears to strengthen with each generation rather than diminishing. The investigation revealed that the portrait's deterioration had accelerated proportionally as more descendants were born. as if the single portrait was absorbing temporal aging from an expanding population. According to Dr. Foster's analysis, by 1892, when James died, he had 5 children, 17 grandchildren, and 32 great-grandchildren, 54 living descendants total. The portrait's catastrophic aging by this date suggests it was absorbing displaced temporal energy from all descendants simultaneously, concentrating 150-plus years of aging that should have been distributed across multiple individuals. But the portrait's destruction following James's death in 1892 revealed disturbing consequences. According to family accounts, Catherine Blackwood had ordered the portrait burned, believing it had sustained her son through unnatural means that violated natural law. Within months of the portrait's destruction, all living Blackwood descendants began experiencing catastrophic aging. Family medical records document the collapse. Between March and December 1892, all 54 living Blackwood descendants experienced sudden rapid aging, corresponding to their actual chronological ages. Children who had appeared to be aged 10 to 12 while chronologically being 40-plus years old underwent accelerated aging that brought their physical appearance into alignment with actual age within months. The effect was fatal for approximately half the affected individuals, whose bodies could not sustain the rapid biological transformation. Dr. Foster's investigation revealed that the portrait's destruction had eliminated the temporal reservoir that had been absorbing the family's displaced aging, causing accumulated temporal debt to collapse back onto living descendants simultaneously. According to medical analysis, the rapid aging represented return of all temporal energy that had been displaced into the portrait over 80 years. Individuals suddenly experienced decades of aging compressed into months, a biological trauma that most human systems could not survive. But what Dr. Foster found most disturbing was evidence that similar temporal displacement portraits had been created throughout the 19th century by artists trained in Vandermeer's techniques. According to art historical research, at least 200 portraits incorporating temporal displacement methods had been documented in European and American collections. The investigation reached its most alarming phase when Dr. Foster discovered that military authorities had been systematically commissioning temporal displacement portraits since the War of 1812, using the technique to preserve soldiers' youth and protect them from combat injuries by displacing aging and trauma into painted representations. According to classified military documents discovered in War Department archives, temporal displacement portraiture provides unprecedented advantages for military personnel serving in hazardous conditions. Soldiers with displacement portraits demonstrate resistance to aging, enhanced recovery from injuries, and apparent immunity to psychological combat trauma. All negative effects are absorbed by portraits rather than affecting living subjects. Dr. Foster's investigation revealed that federal military medical programs had established systematic portrait commissions for officers and specialized personnel throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries. According to classified records, approximately 3,000 military personnel received temporal displacement portraits between 1812 and 1920, creating a small population of essentially age-resistant individuals who could serve indefinitely without physical deterioration. But the military program revealed disturbing long-term consequences. According to classified medical research, extended temporal displacement creates increasing dependency on portrait as temporal reservoir. Subjects who maintain displacement for decades become unable to age normally if portrait is destroyed. They either experience catastrophic rapid aging proving fatal, or they cease biological time progression entirely, becoming effectively frozen at physical state, achieved when displacement was initiated. The investigation took its final disturbing turn when Dr. Foster discovered that many temporal displacement portraits remained in existence, continuing to absorb aging from subjects and descendants who might not even be aware of the portrait's existence or function. According to her analysis, systematic survey of American art collections reveals approximately 70 temporal displacement portraits still extant, many in museum collections or private holdings. These portraits continue functioning as temporal reservoirs, absorbing aging from living descendants of original subjects across multiple generations. Most troubling is evidence suggesting some subjects have survived more than 150 years through continuous temporal displacement, their aging absorbed by portraits that have deteriorated to grotesque states while subjects remain impossibly young. Dr. Foster's investigation revealed specific cases of individuals who appeared to be benefiting from temporal displacement portraits without knowledge of the mechanism. According to confidential documentation, at least 12 individuals identified through genealogical research as descendants of documented temporal displacement portrait subjects demonstrate biological ages significantly younger than chronological ages, suggesting continued temporal displacement effect operating through ancestral portraits. But what Dr. Foster found most disturbing was evidence that the temporal displacement could not be permanently sustained. According to her research, all temporal displacement portraits eventually deteriorate beyond capacity to maintain displacement effect, at which point accumulated temporal debt collapses back onto subjects and descendants simultaneously. The longer displacement continues, the more catastrophic the collapse becomes when displacement failure occurs. The investigation reached its most alarming conclusion when Dr. Foster discovered that her research had attracted attention from military medical agencies who viewed temporal displacement as strategic resource. According to documents she obtained, her investigation had been monitored since she began analyzing the Blackwood portrait. According to a classified memorandum from the Department of Defense, dated July 22, 1959, Dr. Margaret Foster's investigation into temporal displacement portraiture has identified strategic advantages for military personnel requiring extended service periods or protection from combat aging. Recommend classification of findings and implementation of modern temporal displacement programs utilizing advanced techniques. Dr. Foster's investigation was officially terminated in September 1959 when she received orders to close her research and transfer all materials to classified military medical programs. According to her final report, investigation into historical portrait techniques has revealed evidence of ongoing strategic programs that exceed museum research jurisdiction. All materials have been transferred to appropriate military authorities. However, Dr. Foster's private papers, discovered after her death in 1995, reveal that she continued investigating temporal displacement unofficially for the remainder of her career. According to her notes, she documented at least 400 individuals who demonstrated biological ages inconsistent with documented birth dates, suggesting continued temporal displacement through unknown portrait reservoirs. Dr. Foster's continued research revealed that modern military programs had developed advanced temporal displacement techniques, not requiring traditional portraits. According to her documentation, contemporary programs utilize photographic and digital representation combined with biological sample incorporation to create temporal displacement relationships. This allows creation of multiple displacement reservoirs for single subject, distributing temporal absorption across numerous representations rather than single portrait. Most disturbing was Dr. Foster's discovery that temporal displacement technology had been distributed to civilian populations through what she described as commercial aging resistance programs. According to her private notes, contemporary cosmetic and longevity industries may be utilizing temporal displacement principles without public awareness, creating systematic aging displacement into unknown reservoirs throughout society. Dr. Foster's final assessment, found in her private papers, provided a warning that remains chillingly relevant. The 1812 Blackwood portrait documents evidence that human aging can be displaced into representations, creating extended youth purchased at cost of accumulated temporal debt that must eventually be paid. What began as individual portrait technique has evolved into systematic aging displacement that may affect millions of individuals whose youth is sustained through temporal reservoirs they don't know exist. The Blackwood portrait no longer exists, destroyed in 1892, triggering the catastrophic collapse that killed 27 family members within 8 months. But according to Dr. Foster's research, approximately 70 similar portraits remain in collections worldwide. continuing their silent work of absorbing decades of aging from descendants who inherited temporal displacement without inheriting knowledge of its source or cost. Current military medical programs continue to utilize temporal displacement, building upon techniques pioneered during the War of 1812. According to confidential sources, contemporary military personnel in classified programs receive temporal displacement treatments that preserve youth and protect against combat trauma by displacing aging into secure repository systems. Today, you might know someone who never seems to age. Someone whose appearance remains frozen while years pass. Someone whose youthfulness seems impossible given their documented age. They may be benefiting from temporal displacement portrait created for an ancestor during the War of 1812, still functioning after 200 years, still absorbing aging that should be affecting living descendants. But somewhere, a portrait is aging, growing old grotesquely, skin painted with oils becoming cellular tissue that rots and decays, eyes that were once pigment developing cataracts and blindness, hair that was brushstrokes turning white and falling from canvas scalp. The portrait suffers the aging, the illness, the trauma, the deterioration that should belong to living flesh. And when that portrait finally deteriorates beyond its capacity to hold the accumulated temporal debt, when the canvas tears, or the paint fails, or the biological materials incorporated into the medium finally surrender to entropy, all those years will return at once. Decades of aging compressed into days or hours, a lifetime of avoided deterioration descending simultaneously on bodies never built to withstand such rapid biological transformation. The Blackwood family learned this truth in 1892. 27 of them died from the knowledge. The ones who survived carried scars of aging that should have taken decades, but arrived in months. Bodies remembering time they had been spared, collecting the debt of unnaturally extended youth with interest calculated in suffering and loss. Somewhere in a museum collection or private estate, there might be a portrait aging instead of you, and you will never know until the day it stops working, and time comes to collect what you owe all at once, demanding payment in full for every year you borrowed from the canvas that aged while you did not.